All right, now we're going to get started on learning to code our app, and this is in lesson 13. This is all part of Unit 4. What we're going to see on the screen if we open up lesson 13 in the first section is that we have three new pieces of code we're going to be using. That's onEvent, setScreen, and console log. We'll learn about those in just a moment. If you click continue, what you should see is a copy of the app that you created before in lesson 12. Now, if you don't see that, what you can do is click on the drop down and say new screen, or if it's blank, you can go ahead and start editing it in there. However, if you spent time working on that previous screen, you're going to want to be able to bring it in, and I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. So what we're going to do is we need a brand new screen, and so I'm going to go up here and say new screen. Okay, go ahead and click run. We aren't going to have anything other than the first screen, which in my case I already had on the page. If yours isn't, it might be blank. Don't worry. Click the finish button. So now when we hit continue, we're going to go into the first phase of this. This is designing an about screen. So what we're going to do is on our brand new screen, we're going to have this one up here. This one is called screen 1. We need to give it a name. So make sure you tap in the white space so that your properties here displays the properties for your whole screen. And instead of calling it the screen 1, we're going to call this the about screen. Okay? Once we've clicked on that, you can go ahead and hit run, and you can hit finish, because we're going to move on to lesson 4. Now, this is where you have the option to import a screen that you had before. I'm going to show you how to do that. So, let's imagine that you already created something in lesson 12. Well, when you go up to the share button, you can always get the code for the projects that you've made. So this is the link directed to the work that I created in this current project, but if I went back to lesson 12, I could get a link for the screen that I created there. Let's just imagine we use their example one here. So I'm going to copy that. Then what you can do is if you go over to the drop down and you choose import screen, you can click right here and paste it. I'm hitting Control V and then hit next. It's going to show you what the screens look like. There's only one in there right now. So I'm going to import all of them, and by clicking the top one, it selects all of them. If you have multiple screens, you can choose one or all. It's up to you. Then you click import. And as you can see, it's dropped in a screen in here that's been called search that I imported from somewhere else. So it's that simple. If you've worked on it in another place, you can always bring it in. Let's go ahead and hit run. And we're going to hit finish so that we can move on to the next lesson. Now in part 5, we want to start linking the screens. So what we want to do is have more than one screen, and it's actually giving you the option in here to post more. We're going to skip over that for now because we don't need to have more than one for this practice. So I'm hitting run always to test our code. That gives me the finish option, and we hit continue. Okay, now multi-screen apps, which is what we're working with, is basically having more than one screen. When I click on one thing, it takes me to another. If I get to here, I can go back to here, and so forth. This is what I was asking you to map out before. So what a screen basically does is its own user interface. It allows you to collect things onto one page that are interactive. They belong on that one screen, and if you want to create some interactivity, all you can really do is link to another screen or have it run other code in the background. So what we're going to be doing today is focusing only on how to link between those pieces. So all of those things that we just talked about are on this second section in puzzle part 6. This is on number 4. Okay, so there's really nothing new here that we didn't already talk about, but just a good reminder and a good help. So let's go on to lesson 7. Now, we've already talked about how we import screens, and an important reminder is making sure we don't have any conflicts. So you can't bring in things that have the same ID. So if you need to change your ID names so that it's very clear what you're importing, that's also very important. Okay? In part 8, now comes the fun part. It's time to link something. And this is where we switched from design mode, which shows you a design toolbox and a workspace, to the code mode. And if we click on code, you now have a toolbox which is going to have blocks of code in here, and your workspace over here, which is where we're going to put in our lines of code, starting with line 1. So what we're going to do is if we scroll down, we need to add in this block. This block has been made easy for us by not putting in all these other types of blocks that exist. We're going to put one in at a time, and they're only giving you one option. Make things a little easier. So let's click and drag this one called On Event, and then we'll talk about it. So your On Event block is kind of shaped like this, like a letter C. And there's a reason why it takes up 3 lines of code. Because the first thing you're doing is you're pulling in an event. You're calling on it. You're going to say what you need to do to call upon that event. And if you happen to have any functions, we would put that in next. Then what's going to happen is within this function, this green section here, we're going to build other blocks in that are going to tell us, well, what do we do when we click on it? Okay? So now that we've dragged out this one, we want to go over here in the toolbox, and you notice that we were on UI controls. Well, there's a section called variables. Let's click on that. And in there, there's a nice block called console log. This is the second one we were talking about. So we're going to drag this block in too, and I'm going to explain why in just a moment. Now, if we click on the run app as it exists right now, nothing's going to happen. It just stays put. So what we need to do is we're going to hit reset, so that we stop running our code. And we're going to make changes that look exactly like you see on here. So what it's looking for is, what is the event that we are going to be triggering? And that's actually going to be a button. So on theirs, they use the home search button. If you hit the drop down in your ID here, you'll see all the button choices that you have. Remember, I made the one over here called About SDG. And the way I know that is if I hover my mouse over it, you can see the ID is showing up as that second little floating box. So I'm going to choose that. Now I've selected this block. And then how do I want to trigger it? Well, if I click on it, there's lots of options. The easiest one to do is click. And that means if I use my mouse and I click on this, or if I tap it with my finger, that will activate it. So I'm going to leave it as click. Over here where it says console log, what it's going to do is record a message. And I get to write what that message is. This is something that will appear on my side as the coder. So I'm going to say message received. Okay? Now, here's what happens. If I click on run, and now I'm running my program, if I click on About SDG, well, you didn't see anything happen here. But down here in what's known as the debug console, which is going to be a really helpful tool for you to check why your code maybe isn't running the way you intended, it sent me that message received. Now again, that might not seem like a lot of fun because for the person who's using this interface, they didn't see anything. But for me, I did get some information. I found out that somebody clicked on this About SDG button. So let's step it up a little bit more. Click Finish, and we're going to go on to Part 9. Now in Part 9, what we want to do is actually change the screen. That's something that's going to be useful to the user. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a set screen block. Okay? This is going to go inside right here where we had our previous code. So for now, I'm going to take the console log out. I don't need it, and if I drag it to the toolbox, it trashes it. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull in the set screen block, and I'm going to put it right inside here. What it's looking for is, where do you want me to go? So if you hit the drop down, it should show you all the screens that we've created. I'm going to have it go to that search page just because I thought, well, that was really helpful. So I'm going to click on that. And now what should happen is if I run my code and I click on this About SDG, I switch to that screen, the search screen. So that's pretty clever. The only catch is, of course, now if I'm the user and I try to click on Back Home, nothing happens. So what you would have to do is we would need to switch screens. And if I switch over to my search screen, you see now that my code is still sitting here, but it has nothing to do with what happens with these results. So I need to repeat what I did before. I'm going to put in an on event as my next line of code. I'm going to choose the ID, which is the place where I'm at. So here's my search. So we're going to say search. That's what I want to see as my screen. But if I want it to press this back home button, I'm going to click on that. what I want to do is click on the Search Home button. Now, how do I know it's called that? Hover your mouse and you can see the ID comes up. And now what do I want to do? I want to set my screen so that it will go back to my home screen. Now let's click Run and watch. It will go back to the beginning again. So if I click About SDG, it takes me to my search page. And if I hit Back Home, it takes me back here. Pretty simple stuff, but very important because this is how we're going to navigate, and we want to make sure that it's easy for our user to navigate through all of these steps.